Welcome back. Today we're going to learn how to complete this square. So before we complete the square, I want to make sure we review how to factor perfect square trinomials. So when we have a perfect square trinomial, like 10x squared plus 10x plus 25, well, remember we're looking at that value for b, which is 10, and we're saying what two numbers are going to multiply to make 25 and add to make 10. So I put the product and the sum here, and we can tell that right away, 5 and 5. So this is going to factor into x plus 5 squared. So that's why we say that this is a perfect square trinomial, because you can see the square, and then we initially started with 3 terms, which is a trinomial. So if I was going to put that in a visual, well, I could say, well, this is a square right here. And I could say this one side is x plus 5, and this length or width, the second side, is also x plus 5. They both have the same side length, so that's why it's a square. Now for each of these boxes, I'm going to find the area. So if I multiply each of these boxes, I can find the total area. So in this box, we have x times x, which is x squared. In this box, we have 5 times x. In this box, we have another 5 times x. And then in the last box, we have 25. And you can see that whenever we add the areas together, we get back to x squared plus 10x plus 25. So that's just a visual way of using FOIL, which you all know. Now let's practice factoring x squared minus 12x plus 36. So remember, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to make 36 and add to make negative 12. So that's going to be negative 6 and negative 6. So this factors into x minus 6 squared. Well, I could make a visual right here to express the area again. When we multiply in the boxes, we get this is going to be negative 6x and another negative 6x, and this last box will be 36. So when we FOIL, or when we multiply all those out, we could get back to x squared minus 12x plus 36. Now let's practice with something that's a little bit bigger. So here we're looking for two numbers that multiply to make 3,600 or 3,600 and negative 120. So you can tell that's very similar to the one we just did. Just going to be another, multiply by tens. So this will be negative 60 and negative 60. So we'll have x minus 60 squared. And if I wanted to show that with the square right here with this area, we can do the same thing to find the area. So x squared minus 60x minus 60x. And I don't need a plus. I'll just write 3,600 for that last box. Negative 60 times negative 60. Now, looking at these numbers, I hope you can see some similarities. I just want to point them out. That when we factored it, this 5 was half of the middle number. And then 5 squared gave us 25. Now looking over here, we could tell that this is negative 6, and negative 12 divided by 2 gives us negative 6, and negative 6 times negative 6, or negative 6 squared, gives us 36. And then for this last one, half of negative 120 is negative 160, negative 60. And negative 60 squared will be 3,600. Now we want to work backwards, and what we're going to do is actually complete a square. But I want to practice solving, because this is the reason why we want to complete this square. So we're going to step back for a moment and just practice solving with square roots. So remember, if we have this equation, 25 equals x squared plus 14x plus 49, well, I can factor this, right? This is going to be 49 and 14. So again, we're looking for two numbers that add to make 14, multiply to make 49. So this will be x plus 7 squared. So the first step right here, we just factored it. Now our second step is to take the square root. Why do you want to take the square root? We're trying to get x by itself, and we want to get rid of that square. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now be careful, because even though the right side is going to simplify into x plus 7, we're going to get two answers for the left side, because there's two numbers that squared that make 25. So looking at the warm-up, we had 5 times 5 makes 25, but then we also have -5 times -5 gives us 25. So let me just rewrite this. I'm just going to make sure they flip-flop sides. Now the last step is to get x by itself. So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. So I'm going to isolate x. And I'm going to just put a little note to not forget the plus or minus. Now the last step is really to simplify your answer, because even though we have plus 5 and -5, we can write these into two separate answers. So x can equal -7 plus 5, and x can equal -7 minus 5. Right? Those are numbers that we can work with. So the answer is going to be -2 and -12. So what does that mean? It means that those two solutions, or x will equal -2 and x equals -12, that's when this function, x squared plus 14x plus 49, equals 25. So remember, that's like a parabola. So if we said this is 25, well, they must intersect at -2, or I'll put -12 here, that's less, and then -2. So that's what it must look like on the graph. All right, now let's look at how to complete the square, because we want those trinomial squares. They make it a lot easier to solve quadratic equations. So when we complete the square, I'm going to identify these parts. Remember, we took that b, that middle term, and the relationship was we're going to divide that in half. But I just want to make sure I put this as step 1, because we're going to get to some trickier problems. And so before you get started, just make sure that the number in front of x squared equals 1. Now for this third step, we're going to take the b, we divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. So we're trying to see what's going to equal this last square. We're going to get a trinomial, that x squared plus bx plus b over 2. And then the last step, really, we want to make sure we can factor that. Now usually, when we have an equation, we're going to say, all right, what is that square? What is that number? And then we want to use that to solve. Okay, so we're going to just practice with this one. We have x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0. And we want to get it in this form, this factored form. Now, I know that I want a perfect square, and when I look at the 5, well, that's definitely not going to make a perfect square. So for this step, the first step I'm going to have to do is subtract the constant. So don't forget to make sure we're going to just move this to the other side by subtracting it from both sides. And I'm going to leave a space here because now we want to complete the square. I'm just going to draw a little square here, just like we did before. So we have x squared. Well, I know it's going to be x and x when I factor it. And I want to figure out what number is going to go at the end. What are we going to add to both sides to complete that square? So I'm going to take the 8 and I'm going to cut it in half. So 4x and 4x. So I know it's going to be x plus 4, x plus 4. Now the last step is to say what's going to complete the square. Well, I have to add 16. So to make sure I keep this equal, I have to add 16 to both sides. Now in factored form, that's going to be x plus 4 squared equals 11. And that's the form that we want to put that in. So we're going to put that in x plus 4 squared equals 11. Now let's practice solving them. So I'm going to complete the same steps. X squared minus 2x plus 3 equals 0. My first step is to remove that constant. So I'm going to subtract it from both sides. Now we're going to complete the square. So I'm writing this out, but you probably could already figure it out. We're going to take that b, negative 2, cut it in half, so that's going to be negative 1x and negative 1x. So negative 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then when we square it, we'll just get 1, positive 1. It's negative 1 times negative 1. So don't forget to add it to the other side. We factor the left side, so we get x minus 1 squared equals negative 2. And here they're asking us to solve it. So we want to get x by itself. So we're going to have to take the square root here, and we get x minus 1 equals the square root of negative 2. But remember, it's plus or minus. But it has a negative in there, so we know that the square root of negative 1 is I. So the last step is to add 1 to both sides, and we're going to get 1 plus or minus I root 2, or I times the square root of 2. And the square root of 2 has to stay in there in the radical because it's not a perfect square. And because those are not like terms, we can't simplify anymore. Now in this problem, Libby plans to create a rectangular pasture for her horse. She has 340 meters of fencing, or that's going to go around the pasture, and she wants it to have a specific area. She wants this to have an area of 6,000. So what I'm going to do is make sure you write two equations, and I'm going to just draw a little rectangle right here. So I'll label my width as x and my length as y. We want to figure out the dimensions of this pasture for the horse. There's two equations that we can write. The first is the perimeter. Well, if I add up all the sides, I'll get 2x plus 2y equals 340. If I multiply those two, I'll get the area. So x times y, or length times width, we want that to equal 6,000. Now I'm going to reduce this equation a little bit for the perimeter. If I divide both sides by 2, I'll get x plus y equals 170. And now what I can do is isolate one of those variables so that I can substitute it into the second equation. So let me isolate y. So y equals 170 minus x. Now I'm going to write that expression in place of y for the area. So I'll get x times 170 minus x, that was my y, equals 6,000. Now I can simplify this, so we get 170x minus x squared equals 6,000. And because I have a lot of negatives here, I'm going to multiply both sides by -1. And I want to make sure I write my x squared first. So I'll have x squared minus 170x. And I know I'm going to have to complete the square. So I'm making a little space here. Equals 6,000. Now for this number, it looks a little big, but remember we're taking that 170, we're going to cut that in half. So that's 85. And 85 squared is 7,225. So I'm going to add that to both sides. I have to make sure this was negative. So when we factor this, we'll get x minus 85 squared equals 1,225. When I take the square root of both sides, we'll get x minus 85 equals plus or minus 35. So there's going to be two answers for this x. I'm going to write them on the right side. We're going to get x equals 85 plus 35, and we're going to get 85 minus 35. Let me write that a little bit more clearly. So x equals 85 plus 35, and x equals 85 minus 35. So the two answers are going to be 120, because 85 plus 35 is 120, and this was in meters. And then the second answer is going to be 50. Well, what this is saying is that if the length is 125, the width would be 50, or vice versa. So the dimensions of this pasture will be 120 meters by 50 meters. Now let's go to the last problem. For this one, we're going to write the equation in vertex form. So y equals negative 2x squared plus 10x plus 1. Now remember, we said this earlier, we want the number in front of x squared to be negative or just positive 1. So I'm going to have to divide both sides by -2 to make sure I can have a equals 1. So we're going to get y over -2, that's just going to hang out there for a little while. And that's going to equal positive x squared negative minus 5x minus 1/2. So remember, the first step we want to do is add the 1/2, because that's not helping us complete the square. Now we're going to complete the square. And this one's a little tricky because it's odd. So remember, we take that middle number, we're going to divide it by 2, so -5/2, and then we're going to square it. So if we square this, we're actually going to be adding 25 over 4. Now 25 over 4, we can simplify that a little bit more. First we need to find a common denominator for 1/2. So we'll have y over -2 plus 4 over will just be 2 over 4. And then make sure we add the 25 over 4. And we'll have x minus 5 over 2 squared on the right side. Now let me simplify this a little bit more. I'm going to write it over here. So we have negative y over 2. When we add that 1/2 or 2/4 plus 25 over 4, we get 27 over 4. And the right side was x minus 5/2 squared. I'm going to subtract 27 over 4 because I eventually want to get y by itself again. So subtract 27 over 4. And now we're going to multiply everything by 2. So we multiply that by 2, or negative 2 I should say, because it has a negative. Well, if y equals negative 2, x minus 5/2 squared plus 27 over 2. So that one had a lot of different things happening. I had the negative 2 in front, so we had to divide by negative 2. It had an odd number in the middle, so that made it a fraction. So it's still the same process. We're dividing that number by 2 and then squaring it. It had a fraction over here on the left side, so we had to make sure we found an LCD to combine those fractions. And then the last step is to isolate y again. Because remember, we want it in vertex form. And vertex form is a times x minus h squared plus k. So we know that this is going to open down. This is a little sketch because it was negative 2 for the a. And we know the vertex is going to be 5 over 2, 27 over 2. So it's going to be right here. So this maximum value would be 27 over 2. Well, I hope this lesson was helpful, and I'll see you all in class.